And if not for the COVID-19 pandemic, we could have met all these speakers in person, but we were not able to, and I ask for your understanding. We'll now move on to the second theme,
주제 발표, which is supporting the environment. Again, speakers from Japan and Korean Rotary are standing by. The presentations from Japan will begin first. The Global Environment Support Project on the Rotary Day of Volunteer, hosted by District 2820 of Ibaraki Prefecture of Japan, is the topic of the next presentation. Governor of District 2820, Kachuo Arai, will offer an overview of the project, to be followed by a presentation by the honorary member of Hagwon Rotary Club, Masahiro Amano, on the topic of global environmental issues and cleaning up the coasts, which will be followed by a discussion session between the two gentlemen, Governor Arai and honorary member Amano. This will last about 40 minutes. Let's take a look at the video.
Hello, Rotarian. Namaste.
Good morning. My name is Arai, and I'm the governor of District 2820. Let me introduce to you today the Global Environmental Support Project on the Rotary Day of Volunteering hosted by our district. The seventh area of focus of Rotary International is supporting the environment, and President Shaker Mehta has said or proposed the idea of setting up a Rotary Day of Volunteering. So we at the district of 2820 had a plan to clean up the coastal area and invited other Rotarians to participate. And many fellow governors agreed wholeheartedly to this proposal, and a total of 34 districts in Japan worked with Governor Miura to work as one team, Team Japan. And Governor Kurosawa kindly set up a dedicated website where we recruited volunteers, and we were able to get over 30,000 volunteers from all over the world. And on September 12th, the districts did a global Rotary Day of service cleaning up the rivers and coasts. This is how the project began. The global environment is changing organically. So let me begin by talking about where we are in terms of the global environment and what we can expect in the future. Starting from the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol, Dr. Masahiro Amano was involved in the process from the establishment of the Kyoto Protocol. Dr. Amano, good morning. I had heard that global Rotarians are working to clean up the coastal areas, and let me talk to you about what your efforts will bring. Of course, it helps fight ocean water pollution, which is an important part of the global ecosystem. The global ecosystem is deteriorating because population is increasing, the economy is developing, and capital increase leads to various issues. Of course, economic activities, if they could expand exponentially, infinitely, there would be no problem, but the reality is resources are limited. Fossil fuels will run out at most in the next few decades, 100 years at most, and use of fossil fuels leads to environmental degradation. Economic activity based on fossil fuels, such as petroleum, will one day lead to the destruction of human civilization. protecting human civilization is not a currency traded on the world market, unlike the price of coal or oil, which is determined by the cost of acquiring or excavating such resources. Such intangible cost is called social cost, and then the question is who will bear the social cost? Who will pay? First of all, the relationship between various environmental issues. The blue box denotes the anti-ocean environment pollution efforts you are involved in, which directly is related to maritime organisms. It has also a connection to the climate, which I'll get to later. Climate change is at the center of environmental issues. The Paris Convention was widely reported in the news. This leads also to freshwater issues, as well as deforestation, desertification, and other issues. So maritime pollution is most closely connected to decrease in biodiversity and climate change. So among these issues, because of time constraints, I will talk about climate change today. Natural resources or resources depletion. How can we understand these issues? What you see here is Our Common Future, a report issued by the UN back in 1987. For sustainable development, in other words, not just the economic development of the past 50 and 100 years, going forward, what can we anticipate? An important keyword for the world is sustainable development. This was pronounced by the UN Commission back in 1987 under the title of Our Common Future. Without undermining future generations' need for resources, we must fulfill or meet our needs. What does this mean? Let me talk to you in the context of climate change. You see the land mass of ice in the Antarctic region, which on the left is from the 20th century, with the photo on the right is from 2020. If you look at the yellow line, this is the average mass of ice. Back in 1991, it's almost identical, but as of September 2020, the size of the ice has visibly shrunk, and only in the space of 3 decades. The size of the ice has shrunk visibly, which goes to show that the global environment is changing for the worse dramatically. Also, global warming, which I'm sure you have heard a lot about. Back in 1990, this was the forecast for the future. The greenhouse gases or CO2, methane, and others would increase, and emission of these gases would increase global temperature. That was the prediction back then. Now, this is no longer a prediction. As you can see, these days, the climate overall has increased. It's very hot these days. The red area denotes the very hot days or high average temperature days. The red part shows that almost all the regions in the world are red. In other words, global climate increase is no longer a prediction, it's happening, it's here today. Next, concentrated rainfall, heavy rainfall, or heavy precipitation. If you look at the areas subject to heavy precipitation, it's mostly in the northern hemisphere. The 2 points show where precipitation has slightly increased. The 3 points denote where precipitation has increased by a large margin, and so forth. The red areas coincide with the 3-point or 3-dot areas, which goes to show these areas are not only getting hotter, they're getting more rainfall. This means that ocean temperatures are increasing. Otherwise, heavy rainfall would not increase. So right after rising temperatures, there's heavy precipitation. Now we're looking at drought figures. Drought is not taking place globally, but still, drought is increasing the world over. As you can see, climate change that is unprecedented is taking place at an alarming rate. Global warming or climate change is here. It's a real problem. Here you see greenhouse gases. Back in 2007, the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, issued a report issued by researchers. I was one of those researchers that issued a report for the IPCC. Here you see that the CO2 density compared to 10,000 years ago has rapidly increased. It's begun to rapidly increase only recently. I'm blowing up the figure after 1880. In other words, after the Industrial Revolution, CO2 emissions rapidly increased. The same goes for other greenhouse gases. 70% of greenhouse gases is CO2 or carbon dioxide. And on this chart, from 0 to the top, you see warming. If it's below 0, it means that the areas are cooling down. With the rapid increase in CO2 emissions and after 1990, the phenomenon of higher temperatures and heavier precipitation have started to be observed. So every 6 or 7 years, the IPCC issues a report. The most recent one was the 5th report of the IPCC, which said that previously the odds were 95%, but this recent report, the 5th report, says that it's not a probability of 95%. The problem is here. It's happening now. If you look at this chart, the figures again are rapidly increasing. During the past millennium, it was pretty stable, but recently it's rapidly increasing. On the right-hand side, you see a chart that shows CO2 density increase, methane density increase. If you take those two out, you're left with the blue part, which is pretty much even. So after 1850, if greenhouse gas emission had not increased, the line would have been pretty much at a standstill. But because greenhouse gases have been artificially increased, the orange line denotes that greenhouse gas emission is rapidly increasing. CO2 emission is done by humans, which means we can control or decrease CO2 emission. Here you see on the top, the brown line, which is very high. The second line is high. The third line is middle. And the blue line is low. The light blue line is very low. So these are the 5 scenarios with which we can predict future temperatures. According to this scenario, well, the future is what we make of it. What we choose now will determine which scenario actually comes to pass. Depending on what we choose now, we can affect how global temperatures change. Here you see global temperature change, and on the right-hand side, you see how much the temperature changes by each scenario. What the 0 denotes is from 1850 until 1900, the average temperature change is 0. So we begin with the baseline of 0 degrees temperature change. And will this line stay at 0? Will it increase at a rapid rate, or would it increase gradually? That choice is up to us, what we choose to do. Temperature after 2050 will be widely discrepant. This goes to show the level of damage future generations will have to face. We cannot stop climate change or global warming altogether. The blue part is about 2 degrees Celsius change. The Paris Convention determined that we want the outcome to be 2.6 degrees Celsius. So 2 degrees and 2 degrees. But this means that the island states will disappear. They will be submerged. So we have to take into consideration the light blue line, which is 2.5. So the light blue line is where the Paris Convention drew the line, so to speak. So you see the CO2 emissions, it should be brought down to zero. Right now, it's more than zero. We're up to 400 ppms. We want this brought down to zero. What can we do to bring CO2 emission to zero? The vegetation, both on land and the oceans, must absorb some of this absorption capacity. Starting from the left, you see the absorption capacity, very low, low, middle, high, and very high. Again, 5 scenarios. The very low part is where the total emission, which is the black line, and the remainder remains in the air. On the far right-hand side, if you see the very high scenario, because the CO2 density is high, there are absorption capacity available, but still, even with all the absorption, there's still a high concentration of CO2. In other words, atmospheric temperatures will increase. Let's take a look at the ratio. We can see where the bulk of the CO2 went. As you move on to the right, CO2 absorption amounts decrease. So how can we make this happen? First of all, the oxidation of oceans and plankton's capacity to absorb CO2 decreases. So in the very high scenario, the absorption levels decrease. And another thing, if agricultural land increases, that means there's less area for forestation, which will absorb CO2. So as you can see, climate change is highly important. It is at the smack center of all the issues we must tackle. As for the ocean environment, I'm sure you share my understanding that it is highly critical, oxidation and microplastic issues. If we have more microplastic, the maritime ecosystem will only deteriorate, which will undermine biodiversity and aggravate climate change because it reduces nature's ability to absorb CO2 emissions. So having said all that, how should we respond? Human security. This concept was first raised and discussed in the Environment Summit back in 1992. And safety and security until this point was at the state level. But security is not restricted to national borders. This is a global issue, requires cooperation among countries to guarantee human security. Therefore, security extends not just to individual states, but global citizens. Then what should we do? Disputes, poverty, lack of sanitation, education, healthcare services, all these must be tackled. Human security is eliminating risk of conflict, supporting refugees. Refugees are increasing in Africa, the Middle East, and Afghanistan most recently. Also, there's the issue of how to extend support to poor countries. Poverty eradication is important. Japan has an aid agency called JICA, and also through its NGOs, we are tackling poverty. In the past, people used to say that there are plenty of poor people in Japan. Why should we extend our reach globally? But this is missing the point. Other people are global citizens just like Japanese. So this concept of global citizen, not just protecting the people within your borders, is expanding. We also need to provide education globally, not just inside our borders. Rotary International has the word international in its name. And I believe the Rotary mission is in alignment with what I've just said. Human security. If you think about security of the state, your vision becomes myopic. With the myopic approach, you cannot resolve global issues because globally, poor countries are seeing deforestation because that's the easiest and quickest way to increase food supply. But deforestation undermines the ability to absorb CO2 emissions. So protecting human environment and increasing human capacity is a very important part of environmental protection. Enhancing human capacity means people have the wherewithal to choose what to do. Poor people don't have such a choice. Poor countries are focused only on increasing the food supply. Once they've reached a certain level, they can turn their eyes toward protecting the forest. So this is why we want to assist the poor countries to broaden their horizons. This is also the mission that Rotary has set out to do. Supporting the environment requires all of our effort. So this is why I believe you are all engaged in a very important endeavor. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Dr. Amano, thank you for the wonderful lecture. Listening to your speech, we understand that the global environment is at a crisis. Unless we change the way we act now, the future for our younger generation is bleak.
Well, let me ask you a question. Rotary talks about diversity, ecosystems, and inclusivity. So this is the focus areas, and we will be focusing on that is equality and the ecosystem, protecting the environment, and so on. So how can these themes translate into Rotarians' actions? Yes, as I mentioned just now, there are so many different kinds of people around the world. And if they all focus on one single problem or issue, we could reap great results. And that's what Rotary can do. Rotary International, with its network of many countries, can help do that. So one country's wrongdoing can actually have a very bad impact on the rest of the countries. So we want to harness the international network of Rotary. And I think that Rotary can play a very important role, like, for example, cleaning up the ocean, where all people of diverse nationalities can join in. Secondly, I'd like to ask a question. Something that we Rotarians can do very well. Our district has a friendly relationship with a district in Nepal. And Nepal, you have, because of icebergs melting, you have glaciers melting, you have a glacier lake, from melting glacier water, made up of melting glacier water and also accumulated silt. And this has created floods, led to floods, and which has wreaked havoc on the surrounding villages. And we have identified that the cause of the problem is rising global temperatures and the rising temperature of the seawater. And so we want to create a friendly ecosystem that is commensurate with the eco-friendly living habits of the people there. And so together with relevant UN agencies, we have initiated a program for protecting the ecosystem there. And I think equality is a very important theme. Let me start there. Listening to the Nepal story, I've done a lot of studies on Nepal. And to the Nepalese, what do they think of the future? We initiated a survey on that. There was a 14-year-old villager, girl who lived in a village. What is your future dream? And we asked her that, and the first answer is dreams. You dream at night. What is the relationship between dreams and future? I don't have such dreams. What I want to be in the future? So, what do you want to be in the future? Well, it's been decided for me. I'm 14 years old, but my future husband has already been decided. I'll be marrying him this year. So, doing housework and giving birth to children, that is my future. That is what I am destined to do. So listening to those answers, well, when I ask the same question to Japanese children, they have so many answers. And the answer that I heard from the Nepalese girl really made me realize what little choice they have. So many, we have a lot of choices, but there are people living in different areas of the world where they don't have much choice about their future. Another thing I want to emphasize is when it comes to global warming, people think that they have no choice. But we do have options available to do something about global warming. So this kind of inequality exists around the world. So we have to think about that inequality in addressing climate change. Regarding inclusivity and enhancing equality, what can Rotarians do in terms of the ecosystem? First of all, when we do environmental preservation activities, we seem to think that only some special people can do it. But we have to get rid of such thinking. It seems that we seem to think that people in poor countries, they can't do much for their environment, but that's wrong. There are things that we can do. There are things we can do for developing countries and poor countries as well to encourage them to reforest the environment. And so if we think of this as a global problem, we are in the same position. We are exposed to the same problems. So we have to think on the same page. And I think this is very close to the spirit of Rotary, where as many people as possible can come together to address the same problem. Because the environment is a problem that involves many people and many different countries. Like, for example, desertification and pollution is a problem in China, and marine pollution is a problem in another country, and some other problems, other countries face problems of a lack of biodiversity. So these countries should all come together to address this same problem. So inclusivity is a very important characteristic of the solution that we have to come up with to address climate change. So I hope that Rotarians can play a big role in this. Yes, thank you very much for your very important words. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and discussion. As you know, the planet Earth needs the activities of Rotary in education programs, training programs, and also assistance programs in order to contribute to the capacity of poor countries and developing countries to address the problems of ecosystems in their area. And we need to take action in order to preserve the planet and ecosystems for future generations. And this is a new focus area through which we can really, Rotary can really contribute to changing lives around the world. And so I hope that you will be able to listen to the call of the times. Thank you very much.